When my daughter called me in the middle of my mother's birthday party and said just 3 words, "Leave. Now." Mom. I didn't ask a thing. I simply stood up and walked out. No coat. No purse. No turning back. And that was the last time I ever set foot in that house. Welcome to Family Ashes, where family secrets are no longer off limits, and truth is no longer hidden behind the curtain we call love. Have you ever trusted someone so completely that the idea of betrayal never even crossed your mind, until you realized they were the ones quietly orchestrating the loss of your child, your life, your very identity as a mother? If you've ever felt what it's like to have your own blood plot against you, leave a comment. And if you're ready to explore the dark side of kinship, where what's broken still deserves to be told, don't forget to hit subscribe. Because sometimes, the truth needs a place to speak. The party was happening on the ground floor of my parents' old house in Madison, Wisconsin. Spring had just started to creep in, but the chills still clung to the corners of the backyard like it didn't want to leave. Inside, the scent of baked blueberry tart drifted through the house, the one my mom always made when guests came over, as if to quietly declare that she was still effortlessly put together. Pastel tablecloths, cheap wine glasses, soft background music, and the same worn-out stories, it all felt copied and pasted from every other gathering over the last 20 years. My dad, Ron, was retelling his story about crossing the border when he was young. How many times he'd told it, I couldn't even count. Maybe he couldn't either, but he still told it, still repeated the detail about the first instant noodles he ate in America like it was some kind of medal. My sister, Ashley, had just arrived with balloons, pretending she hadn't screamed at her husband that morning for forgetting to pick up the kids. Her eyes were still a little puffy, but her smile looked like it belonged in a toothpaste ad. I sat at the corner of the table, nodding just enough to avoid attention, smiling just enough to avoid questions, and keeping silent like it was a trained survival reflex. Keep the peace. That was my role. Nearly 40, with a once-stable career in Chicago, already a mother myself, and I was still the good daughter, the one who knew when to bite her tongue, when to pretend she didn't see, didn't hear, didn't know. Sadie, my daughter, had slipped out of the living room at some point. I figured she was out back or upstairs, probably reading or sketching like she usually did. No one asked. No one noticed. In this house, kids only got attention when they were loud. Sadie was quiet. And I didn't think anything of it. Everything felt normal, in that way you stop recognizing as strange because you've lived inside it for too long. Until my phone buzzed in the pocket of my jeans. When I pulled it out and saw her name on the screen, I knew something was off. Sadie never called me when we were in the same house. If she needed me, she just walked over. But this time, she called. And in a house full of people, full of forced laughter and hollow nods, that call hit me like an explosion only I could hear. I pressed the answer button, still wavering between doubt and the cautious instinct I'd learned to live with. Mom, leave now. 3 words, so quiet I thought I misheard. But no, her voice trembled, broken, like she was speaking into her palm, or worse, like she was trying to hide from someone that she was making the call. I froze in the middle of the room full of people, surrounded by forced laughter and the hollow clink of wine glasses. Everything kept moving. Ashley was telling some story no one was really listening to, my dad was starting round 3 of his border crossing saga, and my mom had just laid down another tart on the table like she needed to remind everyone she was effortlessly capable. And me? I stood there, phone to my ear, unable to speak. Sadie? I whispered, but the only response was the tight, stretched silence on the other end. No words, just sharp, fast breaths and that same voice still echoing in my head, leave. Now. I didn't ask why. I didn't ask what happened. I didn't wonder if she'd misunderstood something. My body moved before my mind could catch up. I pushed back from the table, walked down the hallway, and went straight for the front door. No coat, no purse, no explanation. I left behind the yellow-toned lighting, the laughter that wasn't real, and the scent of tart my mother always made with that quiet superiority baked in. The door opened, and I stepped out onto the cold, damp concrete. My sneakers hit the ground with a soft thud. The backyard was still holding on to some sunlight, but the warmth didn't reach me. The smell of freshly cut grass and the cheap perfume my mom used to cover the mildew in the house came rushing up like a memory I hadn't invited. And then I saw her. Sadie. Standing at the edge of the yard, near the side path, her back to the wooden fence, one shoulder weighed down by a purple backpack too big for her frame. She stood perfectly still, like any movement would shatter something holding her together. Her eyes met mine. No tears. No shaking. But there was something cold in that look that made me want to storm back inside, tear that house apart, and demand answers from every single person in it. I moved quickly toward her. Sadie? Are you okay? Did someone hurt you? When did you sneak out here? My voice cracked. She shook her head. We need to go. That was it. No crying, no dramatic collapse, no clinging like most kids might do when they're scared. And I understood. She didn't need a panicked mother. She didn't need a scene. She needed me to believe her. She needed me to leave with her right now. I nodded. Said nothing more. This time, I was the one following her lead. Through the backyard gate, down the narrow side path toward the street. No one called after us. No one came running. My mother didn't ask, "Where are you going?" Ashley didn't pretend to panic. No one. And just like that, we were gone. We didn't take anything except a child's backpack, a phone call with 3 words, and a sense clearer than any reason I'd ever had in my life: I had to protect my daughter. No matter the cost. I don't remember how long I drove. I just remember I didn't turn on the music, didn't switch on the radio, didn't say a word to her. We just moved forward, 2 shadows sitting in an old car, sliding through cooling afternoon streets like a stovetop that had been turned off mid-boil. When I turned into the parking lot behind the old grocery store, the one with the broken sign that only read "Save Someth," I stopped. It was the only place I could think of. Quiet enough not to be seen, old enough not to matter. I turned off the engine, pulled out the key, but didn't get out of the car. My hand stayed on the steering wheel, like letting go might cause everything to fall away. Sadie sat next to me, legs pulled up on the seat, arms wrapped around her backpack like it was the only flotation device in the ocean. She didn't look at me. Didn't speak. But her eyes, those weren't the eyes of a dreamy, distracted 10-year-old. They were clear. Too clear. The kind of clarity that only comes when you've seen something you were never supposed to. I tried to keep my voice gentle. Sadie, we're safe now. You can tell me what happened. She turned to me. And those eyes, they weren't a child's anymore. They were the eyes of someone who'd grown up in the span of a single afternoon. I heard them. Her voice was steady, but there was something like steel laced through it. Who? I asked. Grandma, Grandpa, and Aunt Ashley. I sat up straighter. It felt like someone had slapped me with a wet towel. They were in the kitchen. I was in the bathroom. The door was closed, but I heard everything. They didn't know I was there. I said nothing. Just waited. They said they were going to send me back to live with Dad. I could hear my own blood pounding in my ears. They said you weren't going to survive the court case. That you were burned out. That if I went back to live with him, you'd be able to work again. Start helping them again. Pay off debt. Cover things. Sadie didn't cry. Didn't shake. Didn't hesitate. Like she'd rehearsed these words in her head all afternoon. I tried to breathe steadily. They really said that? There's more. I turned and looked her straight in the eye. What else, Sadie? She squeezed her backpack tighter, her knuckles turning pale. They said, maybe, they could put something in your bag. To make you look bad in court. They mentioned drugs. I let go of the steering wheel. It felt like every muscle in my body had drained of blood. It wasn't anger. It wasn't shock. It was something deeper, colder, a kind of unraveling from the inside. They said that clearly? I asked. Sadie nodded. Her lips were pressed into a tight line. I used to think betrayal was loud, like the sound of glass breaking, a scream in the middle of the night, a phone call that exposes everything. I used to believe that if someone truly meant you harm, you'd feel it. You'd sense it. You'd know. But betrayal didn't look like the movies. There was no drama. It seeped through door cracks, curled up with the bathroom steam, and slid into the ears of a child washing her hands after a birthday party. It whispered between shallow laughs, hid behind lines like "we're just worried about her." I didn't cry. But in my mind, memories began to splinter. Every time I'd sent my parents money without a reason. Every time I'd left the office early to babysit for Ashley. Every dinner where my mother looked at me like I was a burden, not a daughter. All of it stacked together into one cold, undeniable truth: I wasn't family to them. I was a tool. I looked back at Sadie. She didn't look away. "I don't want to go back there," she said, her voice cracking slightly for the first time. "Not ever." I reached out and touched her hand. It was ice cold, but still soft. Still a child's. A child who should never have had to hear any of that. Never should have been the one to make the call that saved her mother from her own grandparents and aunt. I held her hand tighter this time. "I promise," I whispered. "We're not going back there. Not ever." And in the silence that followed those words, I realized maybe I had finally left my family. Not with my feet. But with my trust. I don't know when I started being the responsible one. I just know that in that house, I was always the test subject. The eldest. The guinea pig. When I was 10, my parents had me read the electric bill and taught me how to call the utility company when something went wrong. By 15, I was working my first shift at the bakery down the street. White uniform, flower streaked sleeves, and butter in my hair for days. My parents didn't call it child labor. They called it learning responsibility. When I got my first paycheck, exactly $82.40 after taxes, my mom was waiting at the door. Not to congratulate me. She handed me the electric bill. In this family, we all share the load. My dad nodded from behind his newspaper, like it was some universal truth in every respectable household. I didn't argue. Not then. I thought maybe they were right. Maybe I should be proud to be trusted. I told myself that. For years. And my sister? Ashley never paid a dime. When she reached the age I was working, she was flat ironing her hair and planning mall trips with her friends. When I asked why she didn't have to share the load, Mom just smiled. "She's not built like you. She's not as strong." They called my endurance a strength and used it as the reason to stack on more and more weight. I left home at 19 for college and never looked back. I made my own way. Paid my own rent. Drew my own future like a fish trying to swim upstream long after its strength had run out. I met Tyler's sophomore year. He had that quiet calm that made me think, finally, I'd found someone who didn't ask too much of me. Someone I could lean on. I was wrong. Tyler didn't ask for much, at least not out loud. But his silence became a trap. In the early days of our marriage, he was gentle, soft-spoken. I thought he was listening. But then he started snapping when I got home late from work. When I was too tired to cook. When Sadie cried too much at night. First came the sighs. Then the days-long silences. Then the sound of things hitting walls. Bottles of oil shattering on the kitchen floor. Once, the TV remote flew past my head because I didn't skip a commercial fast enough. I didn't dare call it abuse. He'd never laid a hand on me. But I knew some wounds don't bruise. They just make you flinch every time a door creaks open. And then, one day, he threw a wine bottle. Hard and fast. It hit the living room wall and exploded like a grenade. Sadie was nearby, holding her favorite bunny-shaped ceramic mug. The moment it shattered, she dropped the mug and froze like a statue. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I just heard a voice in my head, firm and strangely calm, say, "Enough." I didn't need any more evidence. I packed in silence, shoved a few clothes and papers into a tote, took Sadie's hand, and walked out of the house that was supposed to be our safe place. And I went back to the only place I thought I had left, my parents' house. I thought, at the very least, they were still family. I thought they'd understand. I thought, wrong. They opened the door. But it wasn't an embrace. It was an unspoken list of conditions. They didn't say anything outright, but I felt it in every glance, every breath. I was no longer the useful daughter. I was a burden. A wrinkle on their savings account. At dinner, there was no seat waiting. Sadie had to pull two little chairs together just to sit. Her drawings didn't make it to the fridge. Every time she laughed out loud, my mother frowned. And me? I paid for our shelter with silence. With pretending not to hear the whispered she shouldn't have come back. With smiling when deep down, I knew I had just traded one kind of prison, wrapped in the shape of a marriage, for another shelter with a name called family. I used to think a mother walking into court to fight for her child would feel fear. Fear of losing, fear of standing before a judge, fear of being scrutinized by strangers. But what I felt wasn't fear. It was exposure, like I had already been ripped apart, and now I was simply bringing the pieces of myself into a courtroom, trying to reassemble something strong enough to withstand what came next. Sadie and I had been living at Evans for almost 2 weeks before the hearing. It was a small house with a faded porch, the kind of place where someone could sit all afternoon just listening to dry leaves being pushed by the wind. Evan, my childhood friend, was now a widowed engineer, living alone since his wife died of cancer 4 years ago. We had never been anything more than friends, but when I knocked on his door with exhaustion in my eyes and a child standing behind me, he didn't ask questions. He just quietly opened the door and said, "There's sandwiches and orange juice." I had never known kindness could be that quiet. Evan never made me feel like I owed him gratitude. He just did things. Changed out burnt bulbs, taped Sadie's drawings to the fridge, made toast in the morning. He never stepped into the silences between me and my daughter, he just stayed nearby. Close enough that I didn't feel alone. And then, on a Thursday morning, while I was brushing my teeth, the doorbell rang. 2 people, a brown-haired woman in a gray suit and a younger man beside her, stood at the door, small silver nameplates catching the sunlight. "We're from Child Protective Services," the woman said flatly. "We received a report concerning the living conditions of Claire Patterson and her daughter." I didn't ask who filed the report. I knew. She read from her clipboard, citing concerns that I had no stable housing, that a strange man was living with me and my daughter, and that I was exhibiting signs of emotional instability. Sadie had just come out of the bathroom, towel still in hand. She looked at me, then at them, and said nothing. They checked the rooms, opened the fridge, asked Sadie a few questions. Evan stood in the kitchen, silent, calmly slicing bread and pouring milk into a plastic unicorn cup. At the end, they nodded, left a temporary clearance slip, and said, "We'll follow up if further information is required." I kept a polite smile on my face until they were gone. Then I walked straight to the bathroom and threw up my breakfast. The day of the hearing, the sky was overcast. I remember picking out an old white blouse, worn but clean, and tying my hair up high to look presentable. Not for the court. For my daughter. I wanted her to see her mother standing tall, even if I was breaking inside. The courtroom was cold, the wooden benches hard, and the fluorescent lights did nothing to help the mood. Tyler arrived early, wearing a new suit, hair slicked back, face bright like he'd just drawn the lucky card from a stacked deck. I didn't look him in the eye. And then they walked in. My parents. My sister. My mother wore a beige blazer, lightly made up like she was attending some upscale seminar. My father kept adjusting his tie. And Ashley. Ashley didn't even glance at me. She clutched a folder and walked past like I was a stranger. When my mother took the stand, she looked directly at the judge, her voice smooth and familiar. "Claire has always been sensitive. Very emotional. My father chimed in, "We've worried about her since she was little. But lately, things seem off." Ashley even said Tyler was a wonderful father. "He's always been patient. Always present for Sadie." I didn't cry. I didn't flinch. But it felt like I was being buried alive in a version of my own story I didn't recognize, a twisted version of me, unstable and irrational, painted by the cold lies of the people who were supposed to love me most. And then Sadie stood up. She walked to the witness stand, tiny among all the adults, gripping the sleeve of her shirt. When asked, she looked directly at the judge and said, clearly and steadily, "I want to live with my mom." A heavy silence settled over the room. She listens to me. She makes me feel safe. When they asked about her father, Sadie hesitated for a moment, then said, "He yells. He throws things. One time, he threw a wine bottle at the wall. I was scared. I didn't dare breathe. Then, Grandma and Auntie said they were going to send me back to live with Dad. They said Mom wasn't okay. They said they would put something in her bag so she'd get arrested." The courtroom was dead silent. Sadie went on, slowly but steadily, "I heard them in the kitchen. They thought I was upstairs. It felt like someone had ripped the curtain of lies wide open, exposing everything I hadn't been able to prove, everything no one had believed." During the lunch break, just as I stepped into the hallway, I saw Tyler and my mother arguing. Her voice was sharp, no longer calm and composed like it had been in court. Tyler grabbed her wrist, squeezing hard enough that she jerked it away. My father stepped in, pushing between them. I stood still. I didn't intervene. I didn't say a word. I didn't need to. After that break, my parents didn't return to the courtroom. They withdrew their statements. My lawyer, the one who always wore duck-themed ties and made awkward jokes, turned to steel. He laid out every piece of evidence, Tyler's hidden accounts, the money transfers to my parents, the Florida vacation they'd been invited to. The judge ruled in my favor. I was granted full custody. No visitation rights for Tyler. No conditions. When I stood up, I held Sadie's hand. She turned to me and asked quietly, "Are we done, Mom?" I bent down. "Yeah. We're done. And I haven't seen my parents since." No text messages. No explanations. Nothing. They didn't just lose visitation rights. They lost me. And the saddest part? I didn't feel pain. I just felt light. Like I had finally set down the baggage I'd been carrying through a long, long journey. One autumn morning, while I was making coffee with the old machine Evan had picked up from a garage sale, an email lit up my phone. A job offer. Remote financial consultant, not glamorous, but enough to live on, enough to stand on my own, and enough for me to finally lift my head after months of surviving. I didn't cry. But when I turned away from the counter, my hand trembled slightly around the cup. Evan looked at me, raised an eyebrow, and I simply turned the screen toward him. He didn't say a word. Just slid another pancake onto my plate and patted my shoulder. The new job didn't save me. It didn't erase the past. But it gave me something I'd lost a long time ago, the feeling that I had the right to make decisions about my own life. I worked from the edge of the dining table, laptop stacked on old books, beside Sadie's half-finished drawings and her half-drunk water glass. Sadie started smiling more. She started drawing again. No more dark shapes and angry swirls. Now there were wolves. Big, strong, standing guard in front of snakes wearing wigs. When I asked about them, she said simply, "The wolves don't let anyone get hurt." I nodded. Didn't ask anything else. I already knew exactly who the wolves were. And who the snakes had always been. And Evan? He was still the first one up in the house. He made pancakes in 3 flavors, remembered everyone's preferences. Fixed broken outlets, cleaned the backyard, and set up pretend camping in the living room every Friday night. He never once said our family. But somehow, we had become one. No blood ties, no marriage license, no conditions. One morning, while I was folding blankets in the living room, the doorbell rang. I thought it was a delivery, but Evan moved faster than I did. He opened the door and just stood there, like a wall. I heard the voice. Familiar. My mother's. We just want to talk. We brought pancakes for Sadie. Pancakes. The one thing she knew Sadie liked. The one thing she never bothered to make when we lived under her roof. I didn't make it to the door in time. But I didn't need to. Evan stayed right there, blocking the way, his voice calm, steady. You need to leave now. Just one sentence, but to me, it sounded like the final turn of a key on a door I'd never quite dared to lock. I didn't feel angry. I didn't feel sad. I didn't feel bitter. I just saw things clearly. I hadn't lost my parents. I had simply stopped dreaming they were ever truly mine in the way I had hoped. Sadie sat in the corner of the room, cutting out shapes for her wolf diorama. She looked up at me. Are you okay, Mom? I nodded, walked over, and sat down beside her. Outside, the leaves were beginning to fall. Inside, the pancakes were still warm. Evan was in the kitchen, muttering under his breath while wrestling with a leaky faucet. We didn't have everything. But what we had was enough. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't have to fight to keep it. I just had to live in it. And protect it. With everything I had left. Have you ever had to learn to let go of the very people who share your blood, just to keep peace for your child? Have you ever realized that not everyone who gives you life deserves to be called family? I'm not saying this journey is easy. I only know that sometimes, leaving isn't failure, it's the beginning of something truer, better, and safer. What I've learned is this: family can't be built on one-sided duty. It has to come from both directions, with choice, with respect, and with action. What about you? Has there been a moment in your life where you had to choose between peace and blood? Leave a comment below. I read every one. And if you believe truth deserves to be spoken, hit subscribe to Family Ashes. Because here, we don't hide the cracks. We let the light through.